All right, we are having an interesting time here. The four of us dinosaurs trying to do something with technology. But I'm Rick Moore. We're joined by Tim Kern, Steve Krause, Mike Grenier, and this is our North Shore Sports Night get together. It's our very first reunion together ever. And we had a little technical problem getting Mike on here with video, so he's joined us by the phone. And we have what I think should be kind of some fun. What I'd like to do, boys, is start off with each of you guys. Maybe with just a general sports thought. And then I would like to talk about your three favorite sports moments, as we discussed a few weeks ago, just discarding the most known sports, famous sports moments like, like the Carlton Fisk home run and that kind of stuff. So let's start with Mike, our elder statesman here. And Mike is on the phone. So, Mike, just a general sports topic that you might want to discuss, or you want to get right to your big three?
Well, I mean, I'll just throw out a brief thought, and maybe you guys can, and then I'll go into my big three here. But what did you guys think of Reese McGuire trying to score from second base on a fly ball that he thought was a home run, and it ended up being a double play for the Blue Jays to end the game Saturday? Probably one of the biggest bonehead running plays in the history of the game.
The Sox being the Sox, Mike.
Right. All right, Tim, I'll defer to age. Go ahead.
Thanks. All right, it's just the Sox being the Sox this year. I've never seen so many misplays on the field, whether it's offensive or defensive, miscue. It's like nobody's thinking out there. And the case for fundamentals, being taught even at the major league levels is loud and clear with the Red Sox, and I'm sure with numerous other teams. But we get to see it on a nightly basis with the lack of execution by the Red Sox. Where'd everybody go?
Steve Krause, we probably saw better fundamentals in the Little League regionals that we've gone to over the years. When a Peabody team would be in it or a Lynn team or whatever. We saw better fundamentals than what the Red Sox showed in that game, right?
Well, I've seen better fundamentals at Linfield.
Yeah,
execution at Little League games.
Yeah, that was just an incredibly dumb play and a way to end the game. And wow,
Yeah, that whole game had a bad vibe from when Verdugo pulled whatever he pulled and got himself benched all the way through to the end. And I don't know. We were talking about this beforehand, Rick and I, and
yep.
I can recall having a boss early in my career that if I were 1 minute late for work, I'd hear about it,
Right.
And it got a little laxer as I got older, but if you were late, you got a phone call wondering where the heck you were.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just simple things that whole game had a bad feel to it.
Yep. And then of course they followed that up with a 13-1 loss yesterday. But anyway, on to greater things, right, guys? Because we all have some tremendous lists probably to describe here.
Yep.
So I don't know, Rick, where do you want to start?
What I want to do is I want to start in reverse order. Let's start with your honorable mention if you have one. Otherwise, let's start with number three, and then we'll all go around and give our number three. Then we'll come back to you. We'll do a round table here.
All right. Well, I'll do for honorable mention, it's actually not a win but a loss. But the game that I covered, the 1986 World Series, the infamous Game 6, when the ball went through Buckner's legs, and I covered all 7 games of that World Series. And the reason I put it, let's say, an honorable mention is the fact that it was such a phenomenally important game to cover. The Red Sox were on the verge of winning a World Series for the first time since 1918. They were 1 strike away. And then the way it ended, with the Mets winning it in surprise fashion, it made for such a spectacular story setting, to be in New York City. And now to get the flip side, just as the Red Sox were about to go crazy with a World Series win, it ended up being a Game 6 loss, and then they ended up losing Game 7. But being in that locker room, I could tell you honestly, Tim and Steve and Rick, that was probably the most somber locker room that I've ever been in, because the Red Sox were in a state of shock. So that's why I put that on as pretty high on my list as an honorable mention, not the top three, but because there was so much involved in that game, and it was such a highly covered game by media around the world. I remember seeing Japanese reporters and reporters from all over the world. It was an incredible game to cover. So that's my honorable mention, guys.
All right, Tim.
I guess it's like it was the first thing that I had that came to mind for me. And it wasn't one particular game, but it was a series of games. It was the 04 comeback by the Red Sox. Everybody figured they were down and out, and there was no way they were going to come back against the Yankees winning one game, let alone sweeping the back end of the 4 games,
Right.
put them into the World Series. And the emotions just got higher and higher after each game. And, you know, they were such a group of, you know, sandlot players, as it were. They'd be the guys that you would see down on the playground early on a Saturday morning back when we were growing up in Lynn, and just toughing it out, you know, playing in a hot sun, dusty field, and just being out there. You could feel for the love of the game. And I think that was the feeling that a lot of Red Sox fans had at that time. And, you know, when Kevin, not Youkilis, said, you know, don't let us win the next one because it's all over if we do. And it was prophetic, you know. They had long hair, they had the beards, they didn't care. They were just gonna go up and bite your ankle if they had to, and they did. And they refused to lose. Even if they were down in one of those last games, they just knew and had the feeling that they were going to come back. And I think Red Sox Nation felt that vibe the entire way through the series.
Steve.
All right, I did this in a different kind of a way as usual. I'm different. I did it with the 3 games that had the most visceral moments for me, you know, that I really could connect to on a number of ways. And number 3 for me was the 1984 Doug Flutie Hail Mary. It was finally after many years of just absolutely hating BC. I became a BC fan because of Doug Flutie. And I just thought the guy was great, and I was so crestfallen that they were going to lose after all this emotional investment. And I can remember that I had my son in my lap, and we were sitting in a chair watching the game on TV, and he pulls that pass off, and, you know, I'm yelling and screaming and yelling, and oh my God, he did it, wow. And my wife, who was in the kitchen, came running in. She thought something happened. And I remember handing the kid off to my wife so that I could raise both hands in the air and yell and scream. And it was, what a moment. And I got to tell you, I don't recall too many. I was on cloud 9 like for the rest of the day because of that.
Yeah,
you know,
I had written,
couldn't see it enough times on repeat.
I had written that down also, Steve. Just it really put. I mean, BC was always the college in the area as far as national football, but it really hadn't achieved any kind of status. And when he pulled off that throw, and there were so many magical Flutie moments that entire year, it just seemed to, you know, that was the icing on the cake. And you know, he and Phelan, the two, you know, buddies, and the distance that he threw the football. You know, you saw him scrambling around. And the thing about it, man, he found the time to set his feet, wind up, and let it go.
Yeah.
That's how good he was. As he scrambled away, he did everything fundamentally correct to get the ball to Phelan. You know, I mean, he could have kept running and then just heaved it while he was running it, and it could have been intercepted. But no, he sprints out to the right.
What really amazed me is when you see that play on replay, and you will, I'm sure, before you die, is that all the mountain of Miami players is about 3 feet in front of Phelan, and Phelan actually fell down, and when he caught the ball, there was nobody near him. It was wide open.
Yeah.
And it was just an amazing play.
Yeah. And BC was loaded with so many name ball players at that time because it was I think it was Philly senior laden team. You had Mike Ruth, the nose tackle, who was just one of the premier defensive ball players in the country.
Yeah.
His senior year, he was a beast, and just one player after another who made plays for them. That's what made them such a dangerous team.
My jump in the air moment, Steve, we're not going to talk about because it was Malcolm Butler's play, but my honorable mentions are totally different too, Steve. And I'm not sure if I listened to them live or I heard them later. I think I listened to both of these on radio. It's a tie for honorable mention. One was Kuzi's retirement. When the guy in the stands, it was a completely somber moment, and somebody yelled, "We love you, Kuz."
Yeah.
And the garden just erupted. And similar to that was the Philadelphia 76ers game when they eliminated the Celtics at the Garden, and the Garden just started chanting "Beat LA," and that still gives me goosebumps. I remember listening to that, thinking these fans are cool, because
Yeah, they got it.
yeah, absolutely. So those are my honorable mentions, and my number three, if I can find it here. I was at a Miami game, Miami New England football game in the old bowl. Remember the old bowl that was all bleachers and concrete? Was that Sullivan Stadium?
Stadium.
Yeah. So we were upstairs, I mean, way at the top. And I remember I had field glasses and I was watching John Hanna in particular, because I don't think the Patriots were very good at that time, but I can't remember. But anyway, it was a sweep. And I think I mentioned this before, a sweep to the left, and Hanna blocked at the line of scrimmage. Then he went downfield in front of the running back. He was leading, the sweep. And I was watching a defensive back who, honest to God, he saw Hanna coming at him and he dove into the ground so that he wouldn't be hit by Hanna. And I thought, that's incredible. That is really something. So that's my number three.
He would routinely do that,
Oh,
take out 2 or 3 players in the same play. I still think he is the best Patriot player ever. Tom Brady or no Tom Brady.
Oh, that's interesting. All right. We'll have to get a vote out there on that one. We'll put a survey out. All right, Mike, back to you.
All right, Rick. Well, I gave you an honorable mention, but if I could just quickly add, Rick, regarding Bob Cousy, my dad took me to that game. I was 14 years old.
Wow.
And it was an easy ticket to get because tickets at that time, were not expensive, but also too, the Celtics weren't the brand that they are now. So I badly wanted to go. I might have cried, said, "Dad, could you take me?" But he took me to that game, and along with my older brother, and we had a great time. So that's just a little addendum to your great story about Cousy. And it was just, you're right, it was filled with emotion, especially for kids our age at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. My number three, and Steve Krause will be able to relate to this one because he covered this guy too. 2015, I was semi-retired, but I went out to Cleveland for the NCAA basketball tournament because Notre Dame, with Pat Connaughton, who was a senior, was in the round of 16 with a chance to go to the Final Four if they won 2 games. So I covered the 2 games. They had to win, obviously. In the Sweet 16 game, they beat Wichita State. Okay, and Connaughton had like 16 points, 10 rebounds. And Wichita State had a guy they had 2 future NBA players on that team. Fred Van Fleet, who was with Toronto for a few years, who just signed a 3-year contract at $42 million per year with Houston. He was a star of that team. And there's this Ron Baker guy who was also a great player for Wichita State, and he ended up playing with the Knicks for a while. But yet Notre Dame beat them by like 10, 11 points, and Connaughton had a big role in that game. So I'm covering him, and I get a chance to talk to him after the game and all that. But now it gets even sweeter because they play Kentucky in the Elite 8 game, and Notre Dame had not been to the Final Four since 1978. So we had a local kid out of St. John's Prep, one of the star players for Notre Dame. If they beat Kentucky, which was favored, they go to the Final Four. So they play Kentucky, and Notre Dame played great, took them to the final 6 seconds of the game. It's tie game. Kentucky at the line. Lyle, who went on to the NBA, hits 2 free throws. And 6 seconds left. Notre Dame, no more timeouts. And Darian Grant, who was drafted the first round of months later, takes the ball the length of the court, but he didn't have much time. He couldn't pass the ball. He threw up a wild three-pointer that had no chance, and Connaughton was at the top of the key, all alone for an open three that would have won the game 89-88, okay? But the beauty of it was just here I was covering a local kid who had done so well, won a state championship, and then after that tough loss to Kentucky, I talked to Connaughton. I talked to a one-on-one with Mike Bray, the Notre Dame coach, and then out in the corridor, I saw the Notre Dame athletic director, Jerry Slobrick, who's kind of a national figure. When you're the athletic director of Notre Dame, you're usually interviewed on ESPN a few times during the course of the season. Now, I didn't know him. He's a total stranger to me, except I know who he was. And I introduced myself, and I said, I'm from the Salem News in Salem, Massachusetts, and Pat Connaughton is from my area. Well, his eyes lit up, and he said, let me tell you about Pat Connaughton and what he's done for us here for 4 years. And he proceeded to give me maybe the best quote I've ever inserted in a story about where Connaughton stood in the pantheon of great Notre Dame athletes. And he was very sincere about it. And it was such a great quote. And it told you about the character and the athletic ability and what all the dimensions that Pat Connaughton brought to Notre Dame. And what a great way for him to bow out, because, again, a couple of months later, Connaughton could have gone to Major League Baseball, but he was drafted in the second round in the NBA, and now he's ready for his 9th year in the NBA. So for me, it was a great personal moment because I had seen Connaughton grow up literally and figuratively, and now he went on from Notre Dame to a professional future. Didn't know it was going to be baseball or basketball, but now he's won an NBA championship with the Milwaukee Bucks, and he's getting ready for his 9th season. And being a second-round pick, no one expected or anticipated that. So that, for me, was a great personal moment of in my journalism career to be able to cover that event.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah, great.
Right, you know the amazing thing about Connaughton that you mentioned in that Wichita State game, he had 16 points, but 10 rebounds. I think that people overlook his rebounding ability as part of his overall game. Because he's not the biggest kid. He's kind of like the Larry Bird mold. Not the biggest, not the fastest, but he's one of the smartest out there. He's able to get himself into position to rebound effectively against guys who are typically always bigger than he is.
In basketball lingo, though, I've noticed this about him from watching him for years. In basketball lingo, he is what is known as long. He's got long legs and he's got especially long arms. So he might not be the tallest guy in the world, but his arms and his legs, he's got good spring in those legs, and he can extend those arms. I'm with Mike on I watched that game. The only thing I'll say about the Wichita State game is that you should have heard Mike Shalin crying all the way from across the court or wherever he was, because Mike's a big Wichita State, or was a big Wichita State guy, and he loved his Wichita State. So, what's their name, Mike? The Wichita State.
Are they the Cyclones?
No, some unusual name.
The Shockers.
The what?
The Shockers.
Shockers, yes. And
Shockers.
Yes. Granny Shalin, God rest his soul, was a great guy, as anybody who's ever met him knows. And when Wichita State lost, he pouted for like the whole rest of the day. So
let's move on. I want to hear everybody else's stories. Go ahead, Rick. Who was next?
All right, Tim.
Who's next?
Tim.
All right. This one has always stayed with me because I was sitting in the right field stands when it happened, but Bucky F. Dent's home run against the Red Sox in the 78 playoff. And you're sitting in the right field stands, you got to watch the entire flight of the ball and settle into the bottom of the net on top of the.
Did it even hit the net, or did it just go right over the wall?
Just over the wall, just maybe just settled in.
Right.
And you're sitting there watching it, and poor Torres is standing on mound looking and going, "You've got to be kidding me!" It was
Remember, he shrugged his shoulders because he was so he didn't think the ball would make it over that wall.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, the great irony is, Yaz faces Goose Gossage 2 outs in the ninth, and with a run and a chance to win it, and he hits a pop-up. Oh, you could just feel the entire collective breath of Fenway Park just go.
Yeah, I knew they lost that. I knew they lost that game though when Pinella picked that Remy's line drive out of the sun, and Burleson would have gone to third.
Yep,
entirely did. Yeah,
great recollection there, Steve. Great recollection.
Well, you guys just insist on picking up bad memories. I don't know. Currents.
Mine weren't bad.
No, Kearns and Grenier. The worst Red Sox moments in my life, and I got to relive it with you schmoes. I'll do mine. And I'm going.
Do you have a happy memory, Steve?
I do actually. I said visceral, but visceral for good reasons. And number 2 for me is the Saugus American Little League. This is the 20th anniversary of that series, by the way. The Saugus American Little League beating Texas in the national semifinal, scored 5 runs in the bottom of the 8th inning, I think. It was extra innings. And I still remember that kid Ferreira beat out a ball in which he hit a ground ball and he stopped because he thought it was foul. So even after he stopped and started running to first base, he beat out the ball and the kid scored and they won the game. And it was like, wow, how can you be this emotionally involved with 12-year-old kids? But we all were. And of course, it helped for me. What made it great for me was I knew all those people. I had covered them before they left for Williamsport. I had knee surgery and couldn't go. And Matt Roy was down there. How you suppose that sat with me? Matt Roy was down there. And he did a great job, by the way. But he was down there. And I'm up here watching it. And boy, I'll tell you what. If there was ever a time that I really wished I had been someplace, it was that moment. I really wished. But one of the architects of that team was a guy by the name of Charlie Bilton. I coached against Charlie Bilton in Little League. So, it's
great, Steve. That's great.
We knew each other well.
Good stuff. Good stuff. My number 2 goes back to local football. Paul Ingram was coaching the backfield for Danvers High School. And he would come in, we were pretty young at that time, back in the early 80s. And he would tell us, had this freshman who never dropped the ball in practice, never dropped the ball in a game. Anything he touched, he caught. Turned out to be Mark Bavaro. Bavaro's senior year, Bill Newell and I are covering a game in Beverly. And you remember, they were mutters. They played in all kinds of weather back then. So we're at Herd Stadium. It's a very misty, heavy mist coming down. It's a very slippery field. Beverly has a good team. They've got the ball. They do a sweep to the right. They're coming to their right. They've got 2 blockers out in front of the running back. Bavaro is the left defensive end. Bavaro hits the 2 blockers like on a blocking sled. When one guy can take on 2 guys, he hits both guys like a blocking sled. Their feet are planted. He drives them backwards like a sled into the running back and knocks down all 3 of them. And that is the best high school play I've ever seen in my life.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
He was tremendous. Well, he proved his worth, and
that was
certainly
absolutely stunning because everybody knew how good he was. But man, that good? Jeez. All right, Mike, you're up.
All right, my number 2 game. I think all 3 of you will be able to recollect the importance of the game. I covered it along with Gary Larrabee. 1976 Celtics versus Phoenix Suns. Game 5, Boston Garden, June 4th, hot night, triple overtime. That is, Steve, you and I have covered a lot of games in a lot of different arenas and stuff. To me, that was the best professional game I ever covered, the most exciting. You talk visceral. There were so many emotions that went through me as a reporter and as a kind of a fan, too, obviously. Triple overtime. Nearly everyone had fouled out on both teams. And Glenn McDonald, a rookie out of Long Beach State, gets a couple of big buckets in the 3rd overtime, and the Celtics win it 128-126.
Yeah, he never did anything else again.
I'm sorry?
He never did anything else again.
That's right. That's right. That's right. He just did not pan out in the long run. But Steve, you'll remember this, and you guys probably, at the end of one of the overtimes, the clock, of course, it wasn't like the clock these days. People thought the clock had run out. They ran into the stands, out of the stands, onto the court. And then I still remember Brent Musburger going, and Richie Powers, the official, is being attacked by the fans. He's being attacked. There was all sorts of chaos. They could have probably arrested 225 people right on the court. It took a while to clear the court to resume the game. And then, we went to that third overtime. And I still have that image of JoJo White, who had played like 50 or 60 or 61 of the 63 minutes, sitting on the floor in the final seconds after the Celtics finally took a 4 or 6 point lead, and during a free throw, because he was exhausted.
Couldn't get up.
33 in that game, and it was such an incredible game to cover. It was so hot in the building, and I still remember Steve Krause walking into the locker room, and Tommy Heinsohn, who was totally exhausted, he's sweating from head to toe. The locker room was about 140 degrees, and a guy from the Lowell Sun said to him, Tommy, how'd you guys blow that 20-point lead in the first half?
Oh, man.
And Heinsohn off his suit jacket, and threw it onto the ground and went into an adjacent room, which was off limits to the media. He had to collect himself before coming back out to talk to us. So,
well, he kind of collapsed in the middle of that game, didn't he?
I'm sorry?
Didn't they have to kind of help him back to the bench after that game? Didn't he faint or something like that?
Yeah, he did. He almost passed out. But you know what, Steve? Paul Silas was completely dehydrated, and he couldn't come out to talk. They had him in the trainer's room, and they had to rehydrate him and attend to him medically, because he was completely dehydrated. And the odd thing is, of course, Steve, is that they had to fly out to Phoenix for the next game, and no one had any energy left. And it was sort of, even though it was the championship game and Charlie Scott was a star for the Celtics,
right?
Larrabee covered that game, and there was a terrorist bombing, a mafia bombing right outside his hotel room that made national news. But Larrabee covered the next game, which the Celtics won like a low-scoring game, and Charlie Scott
88 to 80
had any energy, and they won it. They won the whole thing. But on Game 5, triple overtime, well remembered by many NBA fans.
Wow. Great story.
I remember it. I remember Garfield Hurd scored the buzzer beater to take it into the third overtime.
Yeah, turned around and threw in a prayer.
Yeah.
Now, the question was, Steve, if there was a three-point line then, which there wasn't, would that have been a three-pointer and it would have won the game for the Phoenix Suns? I think
so.
Look at the video, but I'm not sure. It seemed like a long enough shot that it would have been a three-pointer.
I think it could have been, yeah.
But in any case, Brent Musburger covered the game. It was just an electric atmosphere all night. And then to get a triple overtime in the NBA Finals like that, and to be a part of it, right underneath the basket there, it was, like you said, that was a visceral game for me, Steve, along with trying to be professional and cover it and write stories about it afterwards.
I agree. I mean, I wasn't there, obviously, but oddly enough, my bachelor party my friend's bachelor party was that night, and everybody else was watching the strippers at the Squire Lounge in Revere, and I was sitting at the bar watching the game. Everybody thought I was out of my mind.
Steve, is your wife in the room listening?
She's not here.
I thought you'd do a little CYA on that one. Honest, honey, I was the only one not watching the stage. I was watching TV.
All right, Tim.
All right. I go back to the good old days. I was trying to think of through the various sports teams and what stands out. And of course, Bobby was goal, which I think we eliminated from a possible choice. But one moment that has always stood out to me was Johnny McKenzie, Johnny Pie, and his love of the fisticuffs.
Yeah.
And how back then they always took care of Bobby Orr. And Bobby Orr could take care of himself, except when he decided to fight Gordie Howe to prove how tough he was.
Mm-hmm.
Then he found out that Gordie Howe was a whole lot tougher. But there was a game, I think it was against Toronto, and Forbes Kennedy blindsided Bobby Orr coming up the ice.
Yeah.
Coming up the ice around, and the way the cameras were, it was on the far side. And you saw Bobby Orr coming up, and he had his head down, classic mistake. And Forbes Kennedy just train wrecked him. Bobby was down. And McKenzie comes up, drops the stick, drops his gloves, and proceeds to beat the living crap out of Forbes Kennedy. Turns him into a bloody pulp. And the referees went, yeah, okay. And they stood there and watched him physically destroy this guy who was probably half again his size. McKenzie, you just didn't do that to any Bruin, and especially, Johnny McKenzie, when he got the ire up, it was like an Irish beer brawl.
Well, the whole game turned into a brawl after that. It was like it took about 20 minutes.
He let loose on Forbes Kennedy like I've never seen anybody let loose on somebody. He was just blood everywhere. and the ref just went, yeah, that was a bad hit. He shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, they let him go. Of course, they did that back in those days.
Yeah.
And that's how you get. You just waited until they exhausted themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, you guys tired? Yeah, we come in here and it's safe. Yeah, and they took all the fun out of the game when they said, you third man in, can't have third man in anymore. It's like, what are you doing? But that was a good. Now, Steve, was that a happy moment for you?
Oh, it's great. I have no problem with that. I just don't want reliving Red Sox horror shows. I mean, come on.
And the thing is, there's so many of those.
There's so many of them. Yeah,
that's the problem.
That's torture.
It continues.
Steve, I know what you're saying. If I can inject a little something here, that would be a happy Red Sox. The 1967 final game of the season.
Oh, you stole my thunder.
No.
Yeah, when Rico Petrocelli caught the ball, and then they had to listen to the radio for a couple hours.
Yeah.
And then they ended up winning the pennant. I was at that game, and everyone jumped onto the field. We were college freshmen. 3 or 4 of us went by car to Fenway with no tickets in hand, and we bought standing room for 50 cents. 50 cents, and we stood along the first baseline, and the Red Sox won that great game against the Twins, and we jumped out onto the field like all the other morons.
You stole my thunder, Mike, but that's okay. I'll talk about my feelings on it. That's my #1 hit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, my God. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Like I want you to elaborate then.
All right.
Oh, you Salem news guys, you do that all the time.
Shut up, Chris. All right. As I just got through saying, no memory will ever top that for me. I know they've won World Series since then. Patriots have won Super Bowls and blah, blah, blah. But that to me still remains the #1 thrill of my life. Was sitting there watching that game, watching Petrocelli catch that pop-up, watching them listen to the game, being really nervous when Dick McAuliffe got up with 1 out and a runner on first, because as anybody of an age of ours would know, Dick McAuliffe was a genuine pain in the rear end when he played the Red Sox. They could never get him out. They either walked him or he got a single. He kept he was just, every time I saw him, I wanted to shut the TV off. But he grounds into a double play against the Angels, and they win the game. And we had the whole neighborhood over the house watching this on TV, and it was a big party at our house afterwards. A few of my neighbors got a little too drunk. I was only 14, of course. I couldn't get drunk. Brenda, how old were you? If you were 14 when Cousy
we were like freshmen in college.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I returned to the college days, and we had my first ever math test in college, and I flunked it. I scored about a 20.
Yeah, the only bad part about that, if there was a bad part, was that I played freshman football up to prep, and they wouldn't let us watch the game because football practice was more important. And, so we had to get updates from guys and everything. But and Tim, you're my age, you know this, you know what it's like year after year after year, from the time you reach consciousness until you get into high school, that the team sucked.
Oh,
I
it's
mean,
awful. Yeah.
they were awful. They lost 100 games just 2 years before. And my friend and our friend Dickie Mariano, dude, he was a guy lived around the corner from me. Would always sit and commiserate, like, why can't we have a good team? How come our team's never on there throwing champagne all over everybody? And then we got one, and it was like, oh my God, the tension was unbelievable. And I don't know what's worse, having them stink or living through that tension that you get when you finally have a good team and they can do something, and you just don't want it to fail. But that was such a happy moment, as was when they finally won everything in 2013. And I was at the ballpark for that. You know, that was, to me, that was a thrill. I mean, that was like a bucket list item.
All right, Steve.
That's
When we were in elementary school, who was the biggest Red Sox fan?
the Nuns.
And who among the Nuns?
Season though.
Odilla.
Yes, sir, Odilla.
What's that, Mike?
Season.
Well, you know why, Tim? One of their sister nuns from Haverhill, her nephew was Mike Ryan.
Right, yeah.
He was on the team, yeah.
Well, that 67 was special, and I
Oh,
remember the record that came out after that. I think it was Jess
Yeah.
Kane who narrated it.
Yeah.
And Carl Yastrzemski singing the Carl Yastrzemski song. Yeah, that was very special because they were so lousy for so many years.
Yep.
Oh man.
Wow.
Well, my number one. I don't think any of you could possibly guess unless you heard me talk about it before. The 1976 downhill, the Olympics. Franz Klammer is the greatest 2 minutes of sports I think I've ever seen in my life. He had to ski the run of his life in order to win the gold medal. He was, I think, the last to ski in that event, and it was unbelievable. If you take a look at that, every turn he's flying. His arms are flailing, his skis are way up because he's letting it all out, and he won. And I still watch that from time to time on YouTube. That is to me the greatest 2 minutes of sports television that I've ever seen.
Then
And of course, Rick,
Secretary of the Belmont has to be a close second.
What was it?
Yeah.
Secretariat.
Secretariat. Any one of those three races, but you get to the Belmont and it's like a crescendo. And you just watch him run away from everybody in the backside of the race. It's like, are they all stopping or what's the story here? Because he's the only one that's going ahead. Every time I have a chance, if that's on, even if it's on a YouTube link or something like that, I watch that race just because it is such a sensational exhibition of athleticism.
Yeah,
It is one of the greatest exhibitions of athleticism ever across all of the sports because he went so fast, and he blew away the competition by so much. It just stands by itself as one of the great individual athletic achievements.
I mean, with no all due respect, with no malice or forethought, and with regards to Franz Klammer, I know he was a great skier. The best 2 minutes I ever saw was that. I mean, that's the longest of the three races. I mean, you have to be a good long range runner in order to do it. It's not a race for sprinters. And boy, I mean, it was like the Yankees winning the pennant by 20 games.
And the thing was, he set time records in all three of those races.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think most of them still stand. That's how good Secretariat was.
Yeah.
Because then they found out he had a super heart.
It's all right. So John Havlicek.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
all right, Mike. We're back to you, I think.
Yeah. But Steve, first, I really, honestly, I didn't see that coming about 1967. I'm so sorry. I guess when you had talked about no more negative Red Sox, I said, oh my God, I was at the 1960, and seeing that as a teenager was a huge moment, but I didn't mean to spoil your number one moment there.
Don't worry about it. I'll get you for it eventually.
All right, I'm going to go to my number one, and this is, again, now we're going to go 2 years earlier than the 1976 playoff. The 1974, another Celtics championship year with Dave Cowens, JoJo White, and that whole group. Havlicek, my favorite player of all time. So, at game, you guys probably remember this, Game 6 at the Garden. They had lost double overtime. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar hit a sky hook from the baseline to send it to seventh game in Milwaukee. And a lot of people thought, okay, that's it for the Celtics. How are they going to win a Game 7 in Milwaukee? Okay, so I get home late that Friday night. I say to my wife, Eileen, we've been married 51 years now, and I said, do you want to go to this game on Sunday? You know, so Gary Larrabee and I both went to Game 7, and my wife, we took she took a flight with us. We got to Milwaukee for Game 7. And so, the story of the game was basically, as you guys know, Cowens played out of his mind and had a huge game, not only offensively, but he fronted Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and it took away some of his effectiveness. They won the game by 15, 102 to 87. Now, that in itself was great. And, of course, going into the locker room with all the chaos and the winning and the wildness that was the play, the celebration was awesome. Now, the best part for me, and that's why I made it a special moment, is that I had written a book called Don't They Ever Stop Running about the 72-73 Celtics. And Tommy Heinsohn had written the foreword for me, okay? So after Game 7 against the Bucks, Tommy Heinsohn says, Mike, come on over here. He took the stat sheet and he took a pen and he wrote, to Mike, we never stop running.
All right.
I hope that's framed somewhere.
Oh.
Yeah, and to this day, Steve, I do have it framed. Okay, the mimeograph sheet with all the stats on it have since faded because it's been like 59 or 49 years, right?
Yeah.
But he wrote that to me, and I guess the fact that I had my wife with me and that she was allowed, it was commercial flight, and Steve, you know what it's like flying back with a championship team we went from Milwaukee to Chicago and then took a jet from Chicago to Boston. And he was on the championship flight with the media and with the players and other passengers. And it was just an awesome thing that whole day from morning to night, seeing the game, having Heinsohn do that special autograph for me, having my wife with me to witness the whole thing. Yeah, that was visceral. It was exciting. It was, to this day, I get chills just thinking about that entire experience.
Hey, can
Mike,
top that?
I was watching the show on Heinsohn. I don't know, it was 30 for 30, and he was talking about one of the players suggested that game plan to front Jabbar in that Game 7 because they hadn't done it the whole series. They said, why don't we just front him the whole game and see what he does? And it threw him off his game so much by having Cowens in front of him the entire time that they were able to dominate.
Right. And the other factor, guys, is that, and Steve, Oscar Robertson was getting towards the end of his career. And in that Friday night double overtime Game 6, he played 58 of a possible 58 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, but he
58.
He couldn't answer the bell two games later.
Shot 2 for 13 in Game 7. And that was another reason the Celtics won. They ran him ragged, and Havlicek was still running forever. But Oscar Robertson was out of gas, and he was a starter, and he played like 45, 46 minutes. He shot 2 for 13, and he hurt them in that game.
He was, as much as I'm a fan of the Celtics and everything, I felt bad for him because I've been following the Celtics a long time. He was such a great player. I still think he's the best guard ever, as far as I'm concerned. And
all-around play, yes, certainly. It would be in the conversation, right, Steve, for the best all-around offensive, defensive.
Yep.
He had triple-double. Come on. He did everything. He was way advanced for the era that he played in. He was just physically, he was totally built solidly. He was a long-time player. Just there's so many great things you can say about Oscar Robertson.
I just didn't like seeing him look that bad. I didn't want him to look so good that the Celtics won, but boy, a reasonable facsimile of the Big O would have been nice, Yep. It was too bad. But yeah, I was at the airport. I met them coming in for that game, and it was that was interesting too. Was that the night that Cowan slept on the park bench?
I believe it was. It was either that or after the '76 series.
One of those two, yeah.
Steve, I think you're right. He went to the park bench around Faneuil Hall, right?
Right, yeah.
Slept there because he didn't want to. He was, of course, he was a mysterious guy, right?
Mhm.
And he marched to his own drummer, and he really didn't. He didn't care for the limelight.
Yeah. He wanted to be back in Kentucky.
Yeah, he didn't care for the limelight, and he was special. Obviously, we all loved him the way he played.
Oh,
Yeah.
God, yeah.
All right, great stuff. Anybody else? Did we miss a number one?
No,
I got mine
Everybody's
in.
all set. All right.
Oh.
Yeah.